But even worse, you're not even like a sales manager. You're an incompetent sales manager. Like you don't know what you're doing, right? You're just trying to take things that you've seen from other people, piece it together and say like, you know, this guy did this well. I'm going to try to do some of that. And this guy did that well. I'm going to do some of that. And
hey, Paul.
Paul,
welcome to the studio.
This is fabulous. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been actually wanting to do this for quite some time now. And the audience listening, they might not know this, but Paul and I used to work at this company called Data back like, I think 8-9 years ago.
Yeah, like 2016, 17. Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to become Paul's friend is because he had an Audi S4.
Yeah, I remember that car fondly.
I'm like, who's that person that comes in this car? Anyway, so that's sort of where I got introduced to Paul. And off late, you've actually been really helpful, almost like a mentor and a coach to discuss, you know, projects that I'm working on. We'll dive into some of those later in the conversation.
Sure.
And I just wanted to give people listening some context. But I think it'll be best that, Paul, you take a second or a minute to sort of introduce yourself in your own words of who you are, what you do, and why should people pay attention.
Okay.
No pressure.
No pressure. Who I am. I'll start with the important stuff. Husband, married for 23 years now. 3 kids, all teenagers. I have an 18-year-old going off to college, which is a little scary. I don't think I'm that old yet, but apparently I am. Love to cook, play sports, softball, golf, water ski, winter ski, do all that fun stuff. Yeah, so on the personal front, that's a bit about me. And on the professional side, I say I've been in sales for 25-ish years. Started off straight out of school, inside sales rep, worked my way up to VP of sales, working with you at Data, which was fun. And then for the last, I guess since 2018, so what's that, like maybe 6-7 years, been focusing on taking what I've learned over the years and helping other people get better faster with customer facing teams.
I think a good place to start, and I think as we were talking, you know, before we started recording, you know, there's this story, this personal story, your journey that you've shared on your LinkedIn profile. I thought that was a really cool way to sort of narrate how you sort of got started, how you felt at that time about what you were capable of, and how you grew into where you're today. So do you want to maybe take a shot at, sure. And this is a little bit open-ended, so feel free to, you know, give your own version of, or an updated version of that story if you wanted to.
Totally. Yeah, happy to. And just in full transparency, this is a combination of my personal story and a way a client described their journey. And when they described it, it really resonated with me. So I've adapted portions of it. So went to university, studied business. When I left school, I decided I was going to try to get into sales. Didn't start out that way. I started working in a very technical digital CAD environment. Then I moved into my very first sales job after a couple of years. And I would say I had some really good early success, not because of anything that I was doing that was unique or special. In fact, I would tell you I didn't know what I was doing. It was a kind of a perfect storm of product, market fit, and me just being in the right place at the right time. And so I was very quickly moved from an individual contributor into a team lead and then into a management role. And the thing that I referenced in LinkedIn is this idea of, you know, you go to bed on a Friday night, you're a very competent, accomplished individual contributor. Over the course of the weekend, somebody sprinkles some fairy dust over you and you wake up Monday morning and poof, you're a sales manager. And it's like, exactly. Off you go, bang, like go make it happen, right? But even worse, you're not even like a a sales manager, you're an incompetent sales manager. Like you don't know what you're doing, right? You're just trying to take things that you've seen from other people, piece it together and say like, this guy did this well, I'm going to try to do some of that. And this guy did that well, I'm going to do some of that. And this guy did this, which I really hated, and I'm not going to do any of that. So, you're trying to figure it out. And it was, I would say like most people, it's a grind. Like you could read a bunch of books, you can do a bunch of courses, but what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for another, and personal style comes into it. So I would say I spent a lot of my journey throughout my career trying to figure out what is my style and what works well. And, I've been accused of being too empathetic and too nice. But I think if I had to err on the side of one or the other, I'd rather be known as a nice guy than as a jerk. So that was kind of what I leaned into, and I would say it served me well throughout my career.
What is the right way, or what did you find the best way for you to learn some of those skills required to be in some of those roles that you were over the span of your career?
Yeah. I think one of the first things that I focused on was always trying to get feedback. And from the people who I reported to, from my peers, and from the people who reported to me. And I think I really valued mostly the feedback I got from the people who reported to me. Because everybody's different. And I think the idea of like there's a one size fits all approach that will work for everybody, it doesn't exist. You need to adapt. You as the leader need to be adaptable to your people and to your team. And so getting feedback regularly from people, I think even just having those personal conversations and really understanding what do people value. One example is, somebody might love the idea of like public recognition. They love getting up on the stage and having somebody high five them and getting recognition, and a group of people applauding them and giving them kudos for their work. But not everybody's like that. And I think there's a fallacy that in sales specifically, everybody is like that. Everybody's this extroverted A-type personality. They want the big hoopla, but that's not the case. I've met tons of people over the course of my career where they're like, no, I actually would just prefer you pull me aside or give me that handwritten note and just say thank you that way. So I would say that that's the first thing, is like just get feedback, know your people, figure out what's going to resonate with each of them and how to motivate and course correct individually. I say the other thing is get a mentor, right? Like have somebody who's in your corner, who's going to help you get better. I've been really lucky over my career. I've had some great mentors starting very early on. Like my father was a very successful businessman. Having to being able to learn from him, bring him challenges that I'm dealing with, and learn from him was awesome early in my career. And then throughout my career, I've had several people who formally, informally have been this mentor role for me. Because one of the biggest challenges, I think, is people have blind spots, and they're called blind spots for a reason, right? Like you can't see them, so you need somebody to point them out to you. So finding a really good mentor, having a really good coach, listening, being open to the feedback, I think those are the big things that I would say as like a first step is where I'd point people.
This is almost feels like a quasi, like, if I could go back in time and what advice would I give myself? But actually, I'm just a little bit curious. What actually got you into sales to begin with? Was it your dad who was a businessman, or like what was those early inspirations for you to get into sales?
It was not my dad. My dad's a finance guy. So he was a CFO throughout his career. And so he wasn't in the inspiration on the sales side. Truthfully, and just completely transparent, I love the idea of making lots of money, and I'm a people person. So when I look at those two things together, sales felt like it was the way to go.
One thing I have observed about you, you are definitely a people person, and you're always very helpful. I mean, at least with me, you've always been very helpful and generous with your time, and actually given me authentic, like candid, real feedback, which is actually really hard to find. So going back to now sort of that earlier point that we were talking about, the role of that mentor for you, and what are the things that you learned early on from that mentor, and even the way they approached you and what those conversations were like?
Early on in my career, I had good, like you use the word feedback, and there's feedback and then there's coaching, and they're two different things. And I would say that throughout most of my career, I actually didn't have a great coach. I had mentors who I could take things to and bounce ideas off of and get their perspective and share my perspective and figure out like a path forward. But in terms of a coach, and I think this is where like organizations should be really heavily investing, is in their frontline leaders, directors, VPs, to become really good coaches. Because people often think about mentoring as a way to replace coaching. Mentoring tends to be, for organizations who programmatically install these mentoring programs, it's like once a month you're going to meet with this senior person and they're going to mentor you to, excel in your role or take on your next career leap. While in like that makes some sense, there's a place for that. I believe that the frontline manager, the person who you report to directly, they should be your coach and your mentor. Like they're the person who should be the ones figuring out and working with you to say, you're doing this aspect of your job really well. Here's something we can improve. Let's figure out how we're going to do that together. And I think that that's where it was later on in my career when I went through, you mentioned the SwitchGear program and the LEAD program, the Leadership Excellence and Development program. That program really taught me that I didn't know the first thing about coaching. And I had to become much better for not just myself, but my people, on how to become a really awesome coach. And so that program really taught me the difference between leading people, managing people, coaching people, and how to coach effectively so people would self-discover for themselves where the opportunities to improve were, and also to reinforce the positives. I think when we talk about mentoring, we talk about coaching, so much of it focuses on the negative. Like, Paul, you got to change this, or Paul, like this isn't going well. We need to find a new way to do that. But there's like 10 things that Paul does really, really well inside of his sales conversations, let's say. Let's uncover those, identify why they work so well, and get your strong commitment to continue to do those moving forward, because they have an impact. But all we tend to focus on from a coaching standpoint is the negative. And that's why I think coaching gets such a bad rap. I had a client describe coaching to me one time as, I get to get punched in the face for 30 minutes. That's what they felt. That's what they felt coaching was. It's like, I'm just going to be told what I suck at and what I need to do differently. And why my numbers are down. It's like, that's awful. That's not what coaching should ever feel like.
Actually, I think this would be, would love to expand on a little bit on, what is, in your opinion and perspective, difference between mentors and coaches, and what should good coaching and good mentorship look like?
I would say the difference between coaching and mentoring is mentoring tends to be, like I already described, it's more, there's greater space in between the sessions. And the sessions, I think, oftentimes rely on the mentee to come to the session with a problem already identified, right? Like I want to become better at, I'm working with somebody right now who he wants to get better at communicating his ideas internally. And so like I'm helping him build some strategies around how do you do that? And so over the course of a couple of weeks or months, we're going to build out these strategies and I'm going to help him implement. And like, that's more like a mentoring thing where he's identified the issue and over time we can build that out. Coaching covers off a couple of things. Number one, it's always in a one-to-one scenario, right? Like if I'm in the front of the room and there's 10 people in the room, I'm not coaching 10 people. I'm maybe training 10 people, but that's not coaching. Coaching is always one-to-one. In my perspective, it always focuses on your current job and how do we help you get really awesome and really good in your current job, not, thinking about your next career move. And there's got to be something that we're going to reinforce as a positive. and then something we're going to adjust as a do better, something we can get better at. And then there's got to be a commitment in terms of, are they going to implement something new? That's often one of the things we hear when we talk to clients on the coaching side is, I wish my coaching generated a greater ROI, right? I'm investing all this time and energy into doing it, and I just wish I could get better outcomes. And so one of the first things we talk about is commitments. Like, are you getting clear and specific commitments from your people? And do you know what specifically is going to change? So I think those are the differences. The coaching is we believe everybody should get coached once a week, and they should have a single coach. It's their manager. They're responsible for their performance and their well-being, and that's what coaching should be focused on.
Can you recall any specific moments or epiphanies that you had getting coached that are memorable, that stick with you till today?
I'm sure I can if I think about it for a second. I don't know if this wouldn't be like a traditional coaching session, but this happened when I was going through this coaching program. I was a sales director, and at one point in the conversation or in the program, Bruce, who was running the program, who became one of my mentors, we were chatting afterwards, and one of the things that he highlighted for me was I actually did a lot of telling inside of my coaching, but I was phrasing it as an ask. So an example would be, so do you think you could have done something different around the discovery questions you asked? I'm asking a question, but I'm telling them you should have done something different with your discovery questions, right? So I'm like, no, I do a lot of asking in my coaching. He's like, yeah, you do, but it's a lot of ask tells. And then that just epiphany right there was like, oh my gosh, like I'm totally steering. We talk about like loaded questions. That's what it is. Like that's the definition of a loaded question. You're asking a question to generate an outcome, and you're trying to steer the conversation. And that's what I was doing. So turning from that to just an open-ended, hey, let's talk about discovery. Would there be anything you might do differently there? And then just stop. Like, let them decide if there is or isn't. Right. That was a big one for me. In terms of my own coaching, it's funny now. Like a lot of the coaching that I get now is around client work. So it's not really the traditional coaching of, like a salesperson goes and does a client meeting, and how do you get better at those? So here's a good example. So I had a coaching session with one of our partners, and we were talking about building out proposals for clients. And one of my strengths is being able to get very tactical and granular on what it is we're going to do to execute on this work. And that is a time and a place where I can improve, and I'm still working on improving this, is on the strategy side. And not in terms of building and developing strategy, but in terms of articulating at a strategic level how this work is going to impact a team, a business, and outcomes. And I can tend to focus more on here's what we're going to do, and I don't provide enough why context up front. I do a little bit, but it can be just flushed out. And I think this is, again, we talk about like mentors, we talk about coaches. I think there's also just partners that you can be working with. And this is where this person and myself, like, we have a really great relationship because he's really good at articulating the why and the context and setting it up. And then I'm really good at, okay, now that we're aligned on that, tactically, how are we going to make all this work and pull this big program off? And that's where I'm kind of coming to get into that piece of it. So it's a little bit of coaching conversations that we have on ways that I can improve that. But then I think it's also just recognizing everybody has strengths and areas of opportunity. And do you want to close an area of opportunity by developing it in yourself? Or do you find somebody to partner with who can complement that?
That makes a lot of sense. Again, I think this goes back to like just being clear on like who you are, what your strengths are, and doubling down on that. And then instead of saying, I suck at these things, I need to work on those, say, I'm going to double down on my strengths and have a partner work in the areas where they're great at. And so you're kind of playing that complementary role. Are there other things that you learned during that leadership program that were instrumental and helpful and shaped sort of your narrative of how you approach the work?
The biggest thing for me was they didn't just impact me on a professional front, they impacted my personal relationships massively. I'll tell you a quick story. So I've already mentioned we have 3 kids. When I think at this point we only had 2. We had our 2 boys. And we were having a house party where my wife's family was over for Thanksgiving or something. And I went upstairs and I noticed the boys' bedroom light was on. And I know my son Ben was the last one out of the room. And so I came back downstairs and Ben was in the room with the rest of the family. And I kind of said to Ben, I go, hey, Ben, I said, the bedroom light is on in your bedroom. Is there a reason why you left it on? And he's like, no. I go, great. I said, like, could you go turn it off? No problem. And I remember my wife's aunt coming over to me and saying, like, that was a really interesting question you asked around, like, is there a reason why you left the light on? And I said, yeah, like, why did that stand out to you? She says, well, because most parents would just tell their kids to go and turn the light off. That was my initial reaction, was to just go and tell Ben to turn the light off. But I was in the middle of this coaching program, and it was all, what it was really focusing on was park your judgment. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Don't assume people are showing up to work every day, you know, trying to sabotage the business. And I just applied it to this thing with Ben, where I was like, hey, I couldn't help but notice. Is there a reason? Great. Would you mind because who knows, maybe there was a good reason for him to leave the light on. I don't know. But that's just one story that I think kind of just highlights how this program impacted me on a personal side. But it's, you know, I apply it every day in my life on the professional front.
In fact, I read this book, How to Speak So Your Kids Will Listen, or How to Speak So Kids Will Listen, something like that. And actually, it's a book, if you read it, it speaks perfectly how to even speak to adults, even though it's meant for like kids. And in that, there's like this sort of, I'm going to paraphrase here, is like, you know, when a kid does something, they work really hard on like a drawing, or they made something like a pot, you know, whatever they spend time on. Instead of saying, hey, you're like super talented, you're amazing. What you want to do is, and this is kind of the thing that you did with, by asking him about the light, is, so how does, you know, when they show you like, what do you think of this painting or this piece of pottery or whatever? You're like, well, you tell me how you feel about it. So the validation is coming from inside the person, the child, and they're figuring out, wait, why did I make this? So as they grow older, they're not seeking external validation for the things that they do, and it's coming from within. I was like, that's a brilliant way to even think about coaching kids.
So my wife is an educator, and she does this brilliantly. And I remember our kids, like my wife stayed home with the kids for 8 years while they were young and growing up. And I remember my daughter paints this picture exactly as you described. And she comes downstairs and she shows it to the 2 of us and says, like, what do you think? And my initial thought was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, this is so great. And Catherine says, you know, I love it. Can you tell me about it?
Oh my God. And
I'm like, what a great question. Like, and she just got Kate to start talking about this painting that she made and all. And I'm trying to figure out, like, what is this painting to start with? And Kate's telling us all about it just through one simple question, right? Validation with a question is awesome.
Genius. I think that is fantastic. I think, you know, these little subtle little things go a lot in building a child's inner confidence. And then, you know, you're kind of driven from within. versus intrinsically driven versus extrinsically. Anyways, we went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but so now, it's actually great to learn a little bit about sort of what has over time shaped your thinking. What are the things that have been important to you? So, in the span of your professional career, what are some of the things I think it would be fun to sort of unpack, get a little bit more into like the trenches and the weeds of like, what are the pet peeves of sales that you notice, like your top 3 sort of like that you constantly notice and you're constantly going in and you're like, oh shit, I got to deal with this again. Like one of the, I'll get you started. Again, I don't want to feed you what to think about, but one of the things that comes to mind, which I was talking to Steve Patty yesterday on another podcast was, is like, what did the CMO say to the CSO?
Nothing.
My favorite. I love that.
Totally. It always happens.
So I think we can segue a little bit into the trenches of like, in your career, like what are the common mistakes that you're noticing salespeople making?
We can start so maybe we look at this from 2 perspectives. Like I think there's the sales people side of things, and I think there's also the sales leader side of things. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about that, the marketing head, the sales head, customer success head, and how you get all those people working together.
Actually, let's add one more layer to it.
Sure.
Even though we're speaking from like a function perspective, but maybe we can nest it under the umbrella of like from a business outcome and performance perspective. Sure. Business performance and outcome perspective.
Okay.
I need to eat some chocolate.
Yep. Get some chocolate, man. That's delicious. The sea salt, banger. I love that. That's so good.
Evens out the taste.
So mistakes I see salespeople making, and let me just start by saying these are mistakes that I've also made, right? Like when I was early in my career, I made a bunch of mistakes that looking back, as successful as I was, I could have been even more successful if I just knew what not to do more so. Let's start with discovery. Because discovery for me is a big one, and it's something that I've spent a lot of time honing and helping clients develop skill and best practices around. So a couple of things from a discovery standpoint are the questions we ask and drilling down. All too often I see people, they'll ask a question about like, what caught your interest about company or product XYZ? And good open-ended question, great way to kind of ease somebody into a discovery conversation. And somebody will say, well, I really liked this, and this, because I'm having a challenge with this, and I think it might be able to help. And then the mistake is, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Paul, because that's exactly what we help people with. Let me show you how we do that. And now it turns, if you know Ron Tite, it's like the pitch slap, right? We pivot from asking thoughtful questions and showing like we actually care and are curious into, I'm going to now pitch my product, right? That's his take on it, and I love his take on it. Yeah, it's a pitch slap with a P. Let me be with a P. Then versus like to do differently in that is, great. So you want to solve this problem. Tell me more about that problem. And they'll give you a little bit more. And then it's okay. And how's that problem impacting your business? Or how's that impacting you specifically? And like, where do you see that being a bottleneck for your team? And just asking more questions. I call it pulling the string, right? They handed you a piece of string with like, here's this business problem. If you pull the string with just like 2 or 3 thoughtful questions, they'll give you way more information. And now you can actually personalize what you're going to show them. And you can tie it back and create urgency. And it's really why I think so many deals stall, customers ghost us, is because we don't really know. We know what the problem is. We don't know enough about it to create urgency and understand the impacts to the business. We do a lot of inferring. We do a lot of assuming around, oh, well, if he's dealing with this, it probably means this, and this. And so I'm going to show him that. That in itself is not bad, but it's way more effective, way more powerful if you can get the client to say it out loud. You can even nudge them. Hey, like, so I've talked to other people and they've said the same thing and they shared that this was something that they were seeing as the impact. What are your thoughts on that? They're either going to say, you're bang on, that's exactly it. And then you're going to find they talk for 4 minutes. Or people love to correct people. They're going to correct you and say, no, it's not that, it's this. Great, tell me more about that. If there was one tool that salespeople could leave with from this conversation, it's tell me more about that. That's it. And you had an awesome one in one of our other conversations. I actually wrote on my whiteboard. I call it the AWE question. AWE. And what else? Right? Just get people to talk more. And they'll open up and they'll tell you, and you'll have way more tools and levers to pull when it comes to down the road. That's mistake number one.
I literally made that same mistake where even though I did get curious and everything, actually the specific problem that the thing that I got wrong was I didn't define the problem in a way that the client was seeing it. And I didn't articulate it in the right way. So I that was a big lesson for me. And I was really thankful, that you kind of were able to look at it from a slightly different angle, be like, oh, I can see where it's broken.
But when you look back on that now, like, do you look at it as like you articulating the problem in how you've seen it or experienced it with other clients?
Tell me more.
Well, when you said you weren't articulating the problem from the client's perspective, so you were articulating it from a different perspective.
I wasn't actually even articulating it, period. Okay. I think that's a much more honest way to look at it. But the context here is I was working on a pretty interesting deal. Can't reveal the name and anything. Yeah. And, the client was really excited. They sent over the contract. Everything was going great. And then radio silence. Well, first of all, I realized that I didn't get them to verbalize what the pain and the problem is in their words, which I should have done. And so folks, like, experts get it wrong all the time. Totally. And I'm the first one to raise my hand and be like, I was wrong. So that's the number one thing that I learned, from the coaching that I got from you. And then the other thing that I learned is there's a big disconnect between here's where we want to go. Yep. Here's the plan. What goes in the middle? So I think that was, there's a couple of pieces there that needed to happen. Anyway, so I think all that stuff that you talked about is getting curious, not jumping to solutions. Like, even though that you've seen this problem before and being like, oh, this is probably the same thing. Just pause, take a deep breath, and the AWE, or tell me more, or what about this, and so more WH questions.
And I see that most, like, so we do the sales side of consulting and we also do the service side. I see it all the time with customer service teams. Customers call up, they describe their problem, how they see it, which often isn't the actual problem. But customer service agents, this is the 100th call they've taken this week that's been described this way. And the curse of knowledge kicks in, and I know what the problem is. I know how to fix this. I've done this 100 times. I'm going to jump into the solution. And then 10 minutes into the call, they realize what they described and what is actually happening aren't the same thing. And now I've just wasted 10 minutes. Literally, right? And so just pause, be curious, ask a couple of questions, works in all those aspects. And I think it actually leads into the second problem that I see, which you just described a little bit. So we have a sales framework that we work within, and it's a 4-step framework. So the first is, we're going to engage with prospects. Once we've got them engaged, we're going to do some discovery. After we do some really awesome discovery, we're able to solve and propose potential solutions. And then the final step is gaining commitments. Like, you got to sign on the line that is dotted to generate revenue. The second mistake that I see, and I am, like, looking back over my career, like, hand up accountability, like, I am totally guilty of this. It's what you described as that rushing to solutions. and we spend, you know, one meeting doing discovery, and then we do 5 meetings doing solutions and proposals and frameworks, and then we get ghosted, right? Like, how many times do salespeople send out a proposal with the pricing and they get ghosted, and it's like, you can't get them back. And so I think if we think about it in 2 halves, so we have engage and discover in one half, and then we have solve and commit in the other. If sales reps would spend 70% of their time in the solve, or sorry, in the engage and discover, everything else becomes easier. And I think we don't spend enough time in discovery articulating problems, gaining alignment and clarity around problems. And because there's just this rush. And again, I'm guilty of this. I even to this day, I have to force myself to slow down, spend more time in discovery before going into solutions. That I would say is the second big challenge that organizations have.
Sorry, one more thing. I don't want to break your train of thought, but I know that we very early on, this is probably like last year or something, we connected on this, you know, the distinction between discovery and qualification.
Yeah.
Qualifying your potential prospective client.
Yeah.
And I think that's the third big mistake that I personally made, is when I'm qualifying and seeing, okay, who's in the room, who are the decision makers, who's going to sign off on this. I did not really get behind that. I made the classical mistake because all my past experiences are working directly with the business owner or the CEO. Yeah. And so I didn't need to like go not coddle, but build those bridges and relationships with other people in the organization. Yeah. And so I would just, for the lack of a better, like just power through and be like, here's what we need to do. And the CEO's like, yep, let's do it.
Which CEOs appreciate, because they tend to be action based, and like they're like, they don't want to spend, their time is so precious. They don't want to spend hours and hours talking. Like, once they've decided they're going to take action, they just want to go and take action.
And so that's another, you know, mistake that I made, which is not qualifying properly. And within that qualifying bucket, like looking at who are the people that need to be in the room aligned with, this is the problem. Let's do it. We're all aligned. We want to do it. We're committed. Let's sign it.
Once we're aligned that there's a problem here, and we agree that we're going to take some action to solve this, who are the people we have to get involved in the next steps? That's a different step, at least the way I think about qualification. That's different from qualifying on the earlier on in the process. Like that for me is more around like the influencers, consensus building, who are the teams that are directly impacted? How do we get them involved in the process? All that side of it. And that's a critical part of sales for sure. When I think about the qualification, so we're going to do like a four big problems now, because I wasn't going to talk about this, but this is one that I see, and it happens in discovery. So during discovery, when the mindset isn't one around, I don't know if I can help this person, but I want to figure out what their problem is, so I can at least get a good handle on, am I the person, or are we the organization to help fix this? And I've made this mistake. I'll tell you a story in a second, but I think if we go into these conversations on the discovery side, where it's like, qualification for me is, can I help this person? So often the mindset is, can I uncover a problem that I can just pitch to? Whether I can solve it entirely or 10% of it, I'm just looking for that wedge for me to pitch. It's not really about discovery or qualification. Qualification for me is, do they have a problem? Is it a big enough problem that they need to take action today, or quickly? Is there a financial impact to this problem? And is this a problem that I can directly influence and solve? If I can't answer all those questions, I shouldn't be pitching a product or solution. But that tends to not be the focus. The focus is, I'm going to ask questions, leading questions, tying back to earlier, that are going to help me figure out, when can I pitch? That's just not good discovery. It's not good intent, right? It's on that side. So the story is this. Early in my consulting career, I was talking to people and different connections that I had. And this one connection came to me and said, hey, like, here's this issue we're having. And it was going back to exactly what you described earlier, the sales and marketing disconnect. And I just started asking some questions, and I was like, you know what, I think I could maybe help her with this. And she was a former client. And I said, you know, like, would it make sense for us to kind of get together and have a conversation, maybe bring some people together? And she goes, yeah, but this isn't what you guys do. And I felt myself trying to justify that. No, this is what we do. And looking back on it, it's not what we do. That at the time, it's like, that wasn't our core strength. And so she kind of called me out on my own, you know, not doing proper qualification and trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, which I appreciate. But that's what happens is salespeople just get into this, you know, tunnel vision of, I got to hit my number. My, you know, sales manager's up my butt. I had a bad quarter last quarter, and that can get in the way of those things. So that'd be number three. Number three is discovery without actually qualifying. Am I a good fit? That's probably the best way to articulate it. Discovery is often, are you a good fit? Or do you have a solution or a problem that I can be a good fit for? Qualification is, are we a good fit together? Or are we really destined to be partners?
Yeah, I could get behind that. I also kind of think of it like a little bit of this sort of dance that on what it's like, you know, sometimes you could read some perspectives and people are like, you know, you got to do one first and then the second, or you got to do this first. I actually lean more on sort of how you're describing it a little bit. So the overarching theme being, you kind of have to do them together. And as you're going through the discovery process, you're uncovering what is their real challenge. And then you're figuring out, number one, am I the ideal vendor that's going to help this client solve that problem? And then the other thing is this the client that I want to work with? Do they have the kind of budgets? Are they culturally aligned? So you're kind of like going into this dance, and you're learning about each other. You're learning about the problem, and you're trying to figure out, would this be a good fit? Because a lot of times, you know, they could bring me on, they could sign me on and pay me some money, but, you know, it just fizzles out. And that obviously impacts your reputation and everything, and blah, blah, blah.
Totally.
Right? So long-term vision versus short-term thinking. So I'm kind of aligned that, first of all, yeah, you got to kind of do them together, and you're kind of learning about the problem, which is the discovery part. And then the qual is about each other.
Yeah. And just building on that for a second, you can have the best solutions and the best programs and the best implementation, but if they're not committed to it, if they're not going to be a true partner and support your work and your effort, all of that time and energy, no matter how much they're paying you, is wasted. And to your point, that impacts your reputation. It impacts your ability to go in and cross-sell into other parts of the organization. So yeah, like, I think that's a really good way to look at it. It's partnership. It's, are you going to get what you need? Am I going to get what I need? And are we going to ultimately have the impact that we both desire? So
what's the third one for you?
The third one, it's less of a pet peeve, and it's more of just like a small shift in thinking. And this would apply. I think we maybe could have started with this. I think there's different types of sales in terms of like complex B2B enterprise sales versus the quick hit, one and done, you know, one call close sales teams. So this one would apply more to the complex B2B sales, is for people to stop sending proposals with pricing. And I know that's going to be like, well, wait, you got to give them the pricing. Yes, you do. But when the very first thing they see is the proposal with the pricing, you've given away like all of your leverage. And this is why people get ghosted, is because they give everything away, and there's no, like, good luck getting somebody to re-engage. So what do you do differently? Here's my advice. And again, I learned this from my mentor, Bruce. Deconstruct proposals into 2 steps. And you're probably chuckling. Like, I've written about this on LinkedIn, but step number 1 is to do an outline. And an outline, it could be a scope of work. It could be a network design if you're in like telco. It could be anything. Like, it's basically, here's the problem. Here's what we're going to do to solve it. Here's the timing. Here's the resourcing. It's everything you'd put into a proposal without the pricing. And then you get to sit with the person who you're working with, and maybe it's a group of people, and you say, okay, here's our outline. That's language we use. We have an outline of our scope of work, and we're going to just co-author this together. And I got the first draft. We're going to probably have 7 drafts by the time we're done. And over the course of 3, 4, 6 weeks, we're going to build this thing out. And what you're doing in the process is you're building alignment and commitment to take action. The more people are involved in the design and building of something, the more committed they are to actually implement it. When you just send them the proposal with the pricing, they have much lower commitment to actually take action. And this is why companies have close rates of 33%, right? Like 7 out of every 10 deals die on the vine because there isn't enough urgency, clarity around the problem, clarity around the outcome, or alignment for the solution. So step number 1, do an outline, get in the meeting room with people, whiteboard it out, edit it, make revisions, do a couple of those. And then once you've got somebody to verbally say, this is exactly what we're looking for, then you're able to go back and say, awesome, I can now price this out for you. And then you provide the proposal with the final pricing.
That's actually brilliant, because this is actually brilliant for a couple of reasons. Number 1, of course, the buy-in and all that stuff that we've just already talked about. But the one thing that we did not talk about is why it's important to bring the pricing at this stage. The other reason for that is because you're pricing what you're actually going to be doing. You're not going to do a scope creep. You're going to be, the price is going to be on the money. Like, yeah, like sort of the pun intended is, it's not going to be things that you end up including later, and then the scope keeps expanding and bloating later. And you have a clear definition of like, what are the actual things needed versus missing out things from the RFP, right? Or adding things that don't need to be added into it. Yeah. I should have probably articulated that in a much better way. But so one is just from a scope perspective, you're pricing what needs to be priced, right? So you're not including things that will need to be into it. So that's actually also a really important reason to do that. I think also then, because now you know exactly what needs to be done, then when somebody looks at the price, they see it as a value, not as like, wait, why are we paying so much for this? So that's the other sort of piece to it. I think that's important. So coming at the right price, and then to seeing that price actually as a value, but not as like, oh, this is too expensive or something. Totally.
Because how many times do people send over a proposal? The proposal doesn't get read. They scroll down to page 17 with the line item price, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's 20% more than I'm paying today. And they miss all the added value up front because they don't read it. People don't read proposals. They just look at the price because they think they know what you're going to give them. 2 more things just to add to that quickly. Number 1 is what is out of scope. I think that's really important for people to articulate and be very clear on to avoid scope creep. And the second one is, what's the role the client's going to play in this? And what are their responsibilities?
Yes.
It always tends to focus on what I'm going to deliver. But we're like, with the work that we do, we have a whole section in our paperwork that talks about like, what are you going to do? Right? Like how are you going to not blow up the success of our programs because of scheduling conflicts, like major launches of new products, like all these different things around, like we just say, like, you're agreeing to not do these things or to do these things because we're both committed to the mutual success of this program. Oh, the second one is like super important. Like, what is the roles that each, depending on the size of the deal and the complexity of the deal, that what is this side of the organization going to do, and what is this side of the organization? Like, what are the roles being played? Totally. And this is where consulting gets into like, the 2 in a box, 4 in a box kind of stuff.
And I think one of the other earlier things that I also personally got to see firsthand when I was within Deloitte is, as an incumbent, you could be like, yeah, we've helped shape the RFP. And that's typically, but they still have to create that RFP because, has to be like, above board. It has to be like, open participation from like different vendors, right? But typically the company that helps shape the RFP is typically the one that ends up winning the RFP. It's not always the case, but that's kind of what I've seen.
Well, and there's also, I was talking to a friend of mine who's big in RFP space, and Chris said that he's now seeing a lot more rules being put in place that if organizations help design and structure the RFP or even the RFP process, they can't actually bid on the RFPs.
Oh, wow.
So that's something, yeah, because it's like they're conflicting themselves, right? For that exact reason, they write the RFP. So I've only participated in a couple of RFPs in the last like 10 years. I'll never respond to another RFP. RFPs are designed to, well, they're designed to make everyone look the same, and they're, if you can avoid them without blowing up your business model, RFPs are brutal in my opinion.
I get it. I would say steer clear of RFPs, but it just happens to be that the last couple of years I was so deeply embedded in just all RFP work.
Well, but it's Deloitte, right? Like, it's like big consulting stuff. Like a lot of that stuff, if it's government, public sector, like that stuff all goes through RFP. So in those cases, you have no choice.
Yeah, and in some cases, what I learned, the way they would approach the RFPs, like, because they give you like it's like a very specific sequence of like, this is what we want, these are the questions, we want them answered in this specific way, and then there's going to be a scoring system. Yeah. And then in some cases, you can't even do any fancy collaterals or create any fancy presentations. It's literally like, even the way you submit it, you can only like submit like an Excel file. Like, it's like so horrible. Yeah. And then you have people sitting in procurement making like a very astute kind of a decision. And it almost feels like it's an isolated kind of a decision in some cases. But I would say, for most people, I would say steer clear of RFPs. For those large organizations like big consulting firms, they have the manpower to kind of...
Yeah, for sure. But even tying it back to what we said earlier, like that sales process, right? You got the engage and discover on one side, you got solution and commit on the other. They take like an axe to the engage and discover side. They think they can pump it out in a Word document that's 75 pages. You're going through and trying to figure out what exactly is the problem we're trying to solve here. And then they force you into this, give us a proposal. They're doing exactly what I just said not to do. Give me a proposal, give me a price. Let me throw you into my Excel document and do the weighting systems. And then you're number two. And in fact, for an RFP that I responded to, I stayed in touch with the guy who was implementing it. And we had lunch like 6 weeks ago, and I was just saying, like, okay, so like we didn't win it, they went with somebody else, and I said, it's like, how's it going? Oh, it's a disaster. Like they said they could do all these things. Their website was even, I looked at the website, I'm like, this is totally the guys you should have gone with. Like they everything they say, like, no, it was all smoke and mirrors. But again, the RFP, it hurts the people putting the RFPs out because they can't qualify them either. How do you qualify if somebody can actually do the job through an Excel document? Anyway, you're going to get me on a whole other rant for RFPs. We're going to turn this into the RFP podcast. That's not the purpose.
Yeah, not at all. I have learned a lot of things working on RFPs. And again, I wouldn't, if you're not the Deloittes or the PwCs or the EYs of the world, I would not encourage getting into RFP unless, like you said earlier, your business depends on it. Oh my God. Yeah. Good memories. One good thing that actually came out of being at Deloitte and seeing how they work on RFPs, because it's typically like you have 10, 15 people, working together towards like a $300 million thing, full transformation project and all that stuff. So despite those constraints and limitations, they were still very like sharp and they would still focus on the relationship. They'd be like, okay, we have the RFP, we have to respond to the mail, but what else can we do? How do we build those relationships? How can we still do that discovery and qual? So I think there's a lot of great lessons. And then the other thing one big thing that I learned from Deloitte was, and this I'm still like working on it, like this is going to be for the rest of my life, is just how to take everything and turn it into a question.
Totally. I love that we're going down this path.
Yeah. And so that was like one of the, I think, and you know, there's this one specific individual who's actually a coach there. And I remember once, this is very early on in Deloitte, and I'm in a room, and you know, there's 15 people, they're talking, 16th floor, like you can see the whole Toronto skyline, and this guy, like leader's just going on and on about like blah blah blah, and he's using all this jargon and all this. I understand nothing. This is my first week there. I have zero idea what they're talking about. I'm like, okay. And my role is to be a fly on the wall, and everybody's just like, you know, nodding along, listening, and you know, everybody has like a very serious, stern look on their face. And then like about 8 minutes into that guy, the person talking at the front of the room, the sales coach gets up and he's like, I'll just gonna use like a fake name. He's gonna be like, Ben, I have no idea what you've been talking about for the last 8 minutes. Can you talk to me like I'm 5 years old? And in that moment, I was like, I'm going to enjoy being here.
Well, and you and 10 other people in the room were like, thank God. Like, now I can get up to speed, right? Totally, because everyone's thinking the same thing.
That was, I think, you know, earlier, I was like, okay, I'm going to like being here because I was part of that sort of same team. Yeah. And I was sort of reporting into that same coach. And so one thing I learned is that they have this culture of like, hey, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it's okay to say that. Or even when you're like, hey, have you heard about this? And they're like, no, I've not heard about this.
Totally.
And, you know, that in itself is so refreshing compared to like other organizations. Like, for example, when we were at Data, you would not see that happen.
No, and
not to throw Data under the bus or anything.
No, but listen, like I think there's people talk about this concept called imposter syndrome. That's exactly what you just described. When you got people sitting in the room, nodding their heads, like they understand what's going on and they're afraid to ask the dumb question, that's imposter syndrome showing up. And it's like, I'm trying to manage perceptions and I don't want to look like I don't have it all figured out. So, you know, I'm a senior leader, and the higher up you get, the less likely people are to ask those dumb questions. There's a great book that was recommended to me that I read a while back called A More Beautiful Question. And this book is, it had an impact on me from several perspectives, because I was a relatively new dad at the time. And anybody who has kids under the age of 4 will resonate with this, to say they are question machines. Like they have no problem coming up with a question and ask like anything. Like every parent has been asked, why don't the birds get electrocuted when they stand on the power lines? Every single parent has been asked that question. And so this book goes into this idea of like asking questions, and I forget the exact numbers, but the concept will still apply. It's like before the age of 3, once kids can start talking, before the age of like 3 or 4, kids will ask something like 200 questions a day on average. And it's like every question, like, well, why don't the birds get electrocuted when they stand on the power lines? Give a response, right? Or I say to one of my kids, you got to eat your peas. Why? That's a question, right? So there's like 200 of those. And then there's this massive drop off by the time they turn 7. And by the time they turn 7, the number of questions they ask drops to like 11. And he goes into a bunch of the reasons why, and I don't necessarily agree with all the reasons, but a big one is when kids go into school, they're told to stop asking questions. Now, my wife, who works in the private system, you know, she would say, no, we encourage questions. I said, I get you guys do, but in general, kids are told to sit down, open your books, get your pencil and paper, and listen to the teacher talk. They're not encouraged to ask questions. And so the one of the big things that I think people don't necessarily connect is asking good questions is a skill. And you know when you're being asked good questions, and you know when you're being asked bad questions or the obvious questions. But when's the last time a sales team, a sales leader, or like a service team, any organization actually invested in teaching people the skill of asking good questions? We talk about discovery and the process and the steps around discovery and the outcomes, but we very rarely do we ever talk about good questions versus bad questions, right? Learner questions versus judgment questions. I'll give you an example. Judgment questions often begin with the word why. So a salesperson goes into a sales meeting, they ask some questions, the customer says something, they don't quite pick up on it. Their sales manager who was observing them did. After the meeting, they say, hey, so when the customer said this, why didn't you respond to that? Judgment question, only focused in the past, forces somebody into defense immediately. Like why questions automatically put people on the defensive. And so I'm always trying to help people shift their thinking away from why questions into a how or a what. Right? So in that same scenario, it's like you ask some questions, the customer said this. What do you think? I'm thinking of one off the fly here. Like, what do you think prompted that response? Now it's an opinion-based question. There's no right or wrong. Like I'm not looking for a specific answer. It's just like, let's talk about it. Let's have a dialogue. So the skill of asking questions, asking good questions, and for me personally, it's moving away from why questions. There are good ways to use why questions, but I think to start, people should try to avoid them as they build the skill.
Actually, this is something, in school, we learn all about like, you should have the answer. But in the professional world, this is something that I learned from Deloitte and consulting and the coach that I used to look up to. The quality of question tells you everything you need to know about that person. One, tells you about their expertise, and you can win somebody's trust and confidence just by the quality of questions you're asking.
Yeah.
That is something that I strive for every day. But the other thing I just want to add quickly before we sort of segue into another thing is, I read another book called Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. There's another guy, Dr. Joe Dispenza. He wrote another book. I forgot the name of that book. But the idea is that, kids till the age of 7 are in a theta wave state. And what that basically saying is, so the whole books are about a little bit about like epigenetics and stuff, but I read them because I'm really curious about human behavior. And so when I read them, and and I'm going to sort of give you the tweet size version, is when a child is in like a sandbox and they make a castle, for them, that's a real castle. That's not a sand castle. When they're imagining like a plane flying in the sky, they're holding it, they're imagining a real plane. For them, there's a distortion of like, this is fake versus real. For them, it's the real thing. Yeah. And so, after the age of 7, there's a drop off because you get into a beta wave state. And so there's alpha, beta, theta. So there's a couple of those. And so when you're in that theta wave state, you're in the most receptive state. There's a very great, like there's no definitive lines between imagination and reality. And that's why kids are super curious and they learn, and it's like connected to your biology actually. And then basically what they were getting at is that, as an adult, when, they say like, oh, I suffered a lot and, I had, go to a therapist and they're like, oh, you had this trauma. It's like, no, that's not going to help because that's been all fed into your subconscious. You can't be like, oh, I'm not awesome. I'm not awesome. Or I'm shitty. That doesn't work. You can't change that. Yeah. So they talk a little bit about, like when you're just waking up early in the morning, as an adult, you're in that theta wave state. That's when you should like practice meditation, and then you can reprogram. Just by habits, you can reprogram who you are. Don't focus on the past. Anyways, I went into a whole sort of tangent here, but that whole, I think there's some maybe correlation causation of like the 8-7 and questions dropping off, what you were talking about. Maybe I could be completely wrong.
I'm sure it's all connected.
But that's what I started thinking about. Anyways, so now this is actually, I'm really glad that you brought up this specific topic that we were talking about a little bit earlier, because this is kind of your area of expertise. Like, what are you noticing about organizations when you go in? Because that's kind of where that's your expertise and that's what you help them with. Like, one is to do with training and education.
I think one of the reasons why people hire SwitchGear and consultants to come in to their organizations in general is to close the gaps on things they want to do themselves, but they don't have the time to do themselves. And if leaders could just spend more time in the field of play, observing their people in action, everything would become more clear to them as far as why results are results, why things are going up when we want them to go up, why things are going down when we want them to go down, and vice versa, when things aren't going as well as we hope they would. I think what I love about the work that we do as an organization is we get to go and do that, like on the ground, in the field of play, at the front line observation. And through observation and diagnostics.
Actually, hold on. Sorry. Let me give, so just because I have a lot more context, I just realized, and the audience might have no context into this.
Sure, okay.
Typically, when your phone rings, what's the other person on the other end saying to you that you're like, okay, like what are those common like 5 or 6 things that you typically hear and you're like, okay, I'm coming over. When do you want to meet?
I'm glad you asked the question, because a lot of the times what I'm hearing are not problem statements. They're problem statements, but they're really outcome statements. It's things like, okay, so for our customer service listeners, like for them, it's my handle time is going up. My resolution rates are going down. My repeat calls are increasing. And all of that leads to, I have a cost budgeting problem, right? On the sales side, it's things like my close ratio is not high enough. My show up rates for demos is too low. I have too many deals that are closing but aren't converting into revenue. I have a churn problem. Those are the things that people will generally say. And those are all, like I said earlier, those are all outcome problems. So let's use the churn one, because it's one that I'm dealing with right now with a client. So we have this churn problem. Our sales are pretty good, but we're trying to double the valuation of this company. And how are we going to do this? So when we think about doubling the valuation of a company, there's 2 aspects to that. There's how much are we going to grow revenue, and then how much of that revenue are we going to retain and not lose through churn. This company, for sure, there's opportunities to improve on the sales side, and we might get a 20, 30, 50% uplift on sales, which nobody would ever bat their eyes at. But the immediate problem is they have a churn challenge. And so they can sit back and they can articulate it as, we have this churn problem. Well, churn is just an outcome of other root cause issues. And so this is a SaaS company. So why are they churning customers? Well, as a SaaS organization, they're trying to, they have a platform that people can use to market themselves differently. But it requires the people who pay for the subscriptions to go in and actually use the platform. Makes sense. They purchase on a 12-month subscription, pay it up front. And at the end of 12 months, as you can imagine, if they are using the platform and they're using it consistently and they're getting value out of it, they will renew. If they're not, they will churn. So when you reframe the problem to say, we don't have a churn problem, we have a customer adoption problem. We have a problem onboarding customers and getting them to use our product and generate value from our service, now you're able to look at this and say, okay, churn is the outcome, but the actual problem we have to solve is early customer adoption. And then you can go deeper. You can say it's customer adoption within 30 days. What does customer adoption look like within the first 3 months? What does customer adoption look like over 12 months? When somebody isn't adopting it the way we expect, what are the tactics we're going to take? And so that's what I mean. Like when you can look at things, when you can step back and look at things holistically, but also very specifically at the frontline level, you're just able to look at things differently and articulate them in ways that people haven't thought of before. And oftentimes, as I'm sure with your experience, that's why people hire us, is because we come with this, breadth of knowledge, breadth of experience, breadth of expertise, and we're able to look at things differently. That's actually how one client described why he hired us. He's like, I hired you because you're going to help us look, and you're going to help us, what did he say? You're going to help us think and act differently. And that's ultimately what we do.
When you had earlier shared this story with me, you had also talked about like how when you had gotten that call, you went in, how firstly they were describing the problem, and then how you helped them reframe what the actual problem is.
Yeah.
And then based on that, recommend a path forward. I would love for you to, if you can, share without obviously divulging the details.
Yeah. So this is a startup company, and they're trying to double their valuation. And anytime you're talking about doubling anything, it's going to feel big and scary, right? Like, how are we going to do this? And the way that it was being articulated inside is exactly that. Like, we're trying to double the company. We're trying to go from X to Y. We want to do this in 12 months. And when you talk about doubling something or growing something, the general mindset tends to focus on sales. And it tends to focus on how are we going to get more customers, retain those customers, charge higher prices, generate more revenue. And yeah, that's one way to look at it. But when I went in and I started digging around and pulling some numbers.
By the way, folks, throw back to the earlier part of the conversation, getting curious in the discovery.
Thank you. And applying my curious brain with my analytical brain, because there is absolutely that side. One person described it as my beautiful analytical mind that can sometimes sabotage the other side of me. So analysis paralysis, I'm sure we've all heard of that. So I started digging in and looking at the numbers, and I was able to kind of figure out that when they were going through really significant growth, they were adding more customers than they were losing. Duh. Obvious. And then over the last, 6-9 months, they were adding customers, but they were losing customers as quickly. And so I started to just kind of break down, it's an MRR business, monthly recurring revenue, applying the rule of 78 to that. And I was able to kind of figure out, okay, for every 12, if we can add 12 customers a month, net customers a month.
By the way, could you explain what is Rule 78? Because most people might not.
So the Rule of 78 is for an MRR business. So if you're in telecom, you know the Rule of 78. But if it's January 1st and Paul Syng signs up to my service and he's going to pay $1 a month, by December 31st, I will have collected $12 from Paul. On February 1st, Mary signs up. Mary's going to pay me $1 February through December. That's 11 months. Same thing happens in March. I then get 10 months. So the rule of 78 is if you take 12 plus 11 plus 10 plus 9 plus 8 all the way down to 1, you get 78 billing months in a 12-month cycle. And so if I can add 12 customers, net customers every month, then we hit this doubling in valuation using the rule of 78 and their MRR numbers. So I was able to build a program that basically said, in the 12 number, the net 12 on the customer adds, 12, it kind of comes throughout this. This is just a happenstance. If I can increase sales by 12%, and if I can reduce churn by 12% for this company, we get to the net 12. So, I built this out. I took it to the co-founders. I said, here's how I'm thinking about how we double this. And one of the co-founders, who is a math guy, he looked at it, he says, this is awesome. Like, it is it is like clear, it's simple, and it feels doable. And that was the big thing for me, was that like I wanted people feeling like we actually had a chance to do this, not waking up every morning going, how the hell are we going to double, sales this month? Like, that's really hard to do. But if you can reduce churn, increase sales, get your net number right, you're off to the races. And so we're actually on target this month to hit our net 12, which is really exciting.
Damn.
And this is month 1 of implementing the program.
I think there's another brilliant thing that you just sort of ran past, and this ties into something that we were talking about earlier, is when we get into defining the problem and, when we get into like the proposal stage before sending the pricing, does the client feel that it's achievable? Can they even do it? Does it seem like this high flying thing? And this is something that this is very big, by the way. This is not a small little thing. When a client feels like, how are we going to do this? Like, well, like, are they freaking out at like this monster that they're taking on? Or it's like, oh wait, yeah, we can figure this out. Like, yeah, we'll need to like maybe put in extra hours or whatever. We'll hire a couple of people, but we can do this. That confidence is so important when you're signing off on a program.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that it did, and this kind of goes back to very early in our conversations, a comment you made around what did the head of marketing say to the head of sales? Crickets, right? That was the beautiful thing about this program, is we were able to very directly align KPI metrics for marketing, sales, and customer success. Exactly. And we were able to say, okay, so marketing has to generate X number of MQLs. They have to generate X number of client meetings. The SDR team has to generate a certain number of client meetings. The sales team has to close at this rate, and the customer success team has to retain this number of customers every month. So now I'm publishing a weekly email at the end of every week where I'm basically, here's what marketing, sales, and CS are being asked to do, and here's what we actually did. And so now we're able to call out, like we had 1 week where marketing like is doing an unbelievable job. We got this new marketing guy in. He is changing the game in terms of how we market, how we generate leads, and he's doing fabulous. The sales team, they kind of stayed flat in their performance as far as close rates. And then in 1 week we had a really bad churn week. So it's just like now we're actually able to look at it and say, okay, here's what happened. And we're not doing it. I'm not doing it in a way where it's like I'm pointing fingers and calling somebody else out. But I'm trying to do it in a way where it's like, we're making progress over here. We have an opportunity to improve this. Like, let's figure this out together. What are the things we can do? And it's amazing when you take a program that's really simple and articulate like this, not to pump my own tires, but when it's really straightforward, to take it to the organization and say, what do you guys see? What are the things that you look at and you're like, if we could do this differently, it would impact churn. Or if we could do this differently, it would improve our show up rates for demos. Like, now you got the whole organization thinking about how we do things better versus how am I going to double ARR? Where do you start? New product lines, new ideal customer profiles, right? We're going to double the sales team and then blow our cost model out of the water. It's like, those aren't good ideas. But when you can get them really specific, you have really, really good. And already I've had like 7 people come to me with, I think we could try this, this, and this. And we've started to implement some of those ideas.
So I really like this example because it demonstrates literally everything that we talked about in this conversation from beginning all the way leading up to this case study. Is you're demonstrating all those behaviors, right? And
I appreciate that because I hadn't connected those dots.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the podcast, dots. If it doesn't fit, I'll make it fit. I played Tetris growing up. Yeah. Oh, I love it. It's really interesting to kind of learn a little bit about like how people think about the world, like their worldview and like how they approach problems. And then you can see it manifest in the way they approach the work and how they do the work. And I think, by the way, one more thing. This is something that I learned yesterday from Steve Patty. He's another really sharp, switched on guy. Is I think one of the observations, now that I have this perspective, additional perspective in my head, I can look at what you were doing, and you're like, instead of focusing on, the sales team, the customer success, you're like, let's all huddle around this one KPI. Yeah. Right? And let's all align towards this one goal. And you're getting them all to focus on it's, culture is basically like how you huddle around the work, right? How you form around the work that has to be done. But instead, you're like, you slightly tweak that and you're like, how do we form around the customer? From bringing them in and then keeping them. Yeah. And you're sort of working that whole chain now. It's not like a disjointed handoff that's happening, but it's like, oh, I gotta be thinking about the whole thing end to end.
Yeah, the other way that we articulate that is we're really trying to create mutual purpose.
Yeah.
And when you can do that and you get everybody pushing on the same side of the snowball, now you've got momentum and you're able to create some really good motions as a result.
Yeah. In fact, there's a company called Red Ventures. I think that's their name. They own a whole bunch of companies like the Points Guy and Raid Hub, kind of, those SEO heavy sites. And they also organize their teams around a very similar format. Okay, this KPI, and then it's all the different functions work together to just own that one whole chain. Yeah. And then they double down on it. So this is I think, and they're $1 billion enterprise. Anyways, I recently heard that, so that sort of came up in my brain. Now, I know that we've talked about some other case studies also. And again, without divulging names or anything, I remember there's a telecom operator that we had talked about very early on. I would love to go into that one.
Sure. Yeah. So we worked with one of the big three in Canada, and we were partners with them for about 5 years. And it started off as working with their entire customer service team across Canada. So it was 10,000 frontline employees, 700-ish frontline leaders. And we were bringing the same program to them, and a version of it that I'd gone through as a sales manager. And it was all around coaching and how do we help people get better in their roles. And it was a really fascinating client to work with, because we started working with them in 2018, and then March of 2020 happened. And if we all recall the pandemic and what happened there.
Oh, that thing.
Yeah, that thing. Yeah, you remember that thing? We were drastically affected by this because we did all of our workshops in person. And so I was on a plane every other week, Montreal, Vancouver, doing work in Toronto. And so we had to really adjust our program and evolve and iterate to become a virtual program, which in itself was a very interesting exercise, but not the purpose of this chat. So for the first 2 years of this work together, we were really just focusing on how do we help them have better conversations with their customers? How do we help frontline leaders become really awesome coaches? And we were having amazing success.
By the way, just for people listening who are non-marketing, and it's basically, when you have a problem with your service and you call the number, somebody picks up and
totally
walks you through the problem.
Yep.
That team, that's the frontline worker we're referring to, just for the sake of, right?
Exactly. That's it. Yeah.
Just want to make sure that,
people would call in and, like you described, they're having an issue with their internet at home. They don't understand their bill. They want to cancel their service. They're moving homes. Any scenario you could think of, these teams were handling. Win backs, all of it. And so we were building out what's called a customer experience map. And these maps are essentially a series of best practices used from hello to goodbye. And they would cover the entire conversation. And we built them. They were scenario based for the different teams. And whether you were moving, canceling, wanting to add services, a question about your bill, my internet's not working. How do I reboot my router? We built out maps for all of that. And then in parallel, we were coaching. We were teaching them how to become really great coaches. And how do we help reinforce these best practices and make sure they're happening consistently in these conversations? And so at one point in our time together, right around the pandemic, we noticed this shift that and a lot of people would have seen this. In the first year of the pandemic, our humanity was exposed in a positive way. I found people were a lot more understanding. Like, we had this common enemy called COVID, and we were empathetic towards each other. We were very understanding of when things didn't quite go as planned, because we were all figuring out this new world we lived in. Fast forward about a year to the summer of 2021, and our humanity, the other side of our humanity, began to expose itself. People's frustration, their loneliness, isolation, mental health deterioration began to expose itself and show up. And we noticed, again, because metrics are the first thing that we see move when we're standing away from a distance, we noticed attrition and absenteeism rise. So attrition is employees who quit voluntarily. Absenteeism are employees who don't show up for their shift. We see these two things start to go up. And again, when those things go up, our costs go up. And now what's already viewed as a cost center is under the microscope on, why are you costing us so much money? And so we were in a really fortunate position, because we were already working intimately with the frontline teams. And we were able to sit back and kind of say, like, what have we noticed? Like, what's going on? And through our program, we run these weekly meetings, and we were able to kind of call it out and say, hey, like, this is happening. Here's what we're seeing on the metric side. What are some of the things that might be contributing to this? And somebody just, like, very nonchalantly said, well, yeah, so-and-so on my team didn't come into work today because yesterday they had a really awful call with a client. And I was like, oh, I said, like, tell me more about awful call. And they actually had a recording of the call. They pulled it up and we listened to it. And it was like, like racist, sexist, derogatory, like just any word you could think of to describe a really horrible human being in interaction would apply to this conversation. And as we listened to it and our mouths were sitting on the desk, it's like 3 other managers are like, oh yeah, like I had one of those 2 weeks ago. Oh, I had one of those yesterday. And we started to just kind of like, so something's going on. So we started to dig in, and we actually built a very specific best practice for agents on how to handle what we called abusive moments. And it required we had to get executive approval for it, because it actually changed their operating principles as an organization. So some contact centers have a rule that the agent isn't allowed to hang up or terminate the call. The customer has to hang up. And there's reasons for it, and we're not going to debate good or bad reasons, but there's reasons for it. And so we actually challenge that to say, we're gonna teach agents how to handle these abusive moments proactively, but we're also going to give them permission to terminate the call if the customer isn't going to abide by our rules. And it took some convincing, but we had an awesome partner in the VP at the time. And now when you call in, they will, you'll hear the IVR, and that's that thing where it says press 1 for this, press 1. The very first thing you'll hear is, we have a 0 tolerance policy around abuse towards our employees. And so I'm super proud of that work and the way that we supported the agents through that. And I've now since then become hypersensitive to it. And the number of times you walk into a Starbucks or any retail store now, you're going to see signs that say 0 tolerance, be kind or leave type things. That's one that I saw at a place yesterday. So yeah, like that for me was great, but we never would have uncovered that if we weren't working as intimately with the front line. And again, just posing some questions and getting people to it was just, they didn't know if it was the reason. They said, here's what happened. And we were able to, most importantly, build a tool that agents can use to handle those situations and not get verbally abused in their job.
Without, again, divulging into details, I would love to know like what kind of processes or like what kind of like, not tactics, but like motions and rituals or things. If you could, you know, share anything, that would be great to learn, like how to handle these difficult situations. Like how did they?
Totally. Yeah, it was, and it's funny. If you ask my daughter what I do for a living, she says, my dad teaches people how to talk to other people. You know, I'm going to try not to be offended by that, but at the same time, it's a really simplistic way of describing exactly what I do.
There's your elevator pitch.
There's my elevator pitch. And so that's exactly what we were doing here. We were basically teaching people how to acknowledge somebody's emotion, and then also set boundaries. And so I think when we talk about acknowledgement, again, just it's a skill, just like asking questions, like being able to acknowledge when somebody is really upset and they're swearing in the conversation, not necessarily swearing at you, but they're swearing at the situation. How do you acknowledge that emotion? Because it's amazing when you acknowledge somebody's emotion. What does that do for them? They immediately feel heard. They can feel understood. They feel like you are putting yourself in their shoes. And when somebody feels heard, it's amazing how quickly their emotion will de-escalate in some cases. When we see emotions escalate, it's because we oftentimes hear agents dismissing the emotion. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like, let me see what I can do to fix this. No, you don't hear, you're not understanding. And they just, boom, like they're now dealing with Mount Irate, right? And they're having this really difficult conversation. So first step is always to acknowledge. The second step is then to set boundaries and say, listen, I'm on your side. I'm going to do everything in my power to fix this and make this right. I can't do that if you're going to talk to me in this tone or this way. Can we agree that we're going to treat each other with respect? And then that will oftentimes be all you have to say, and you'll have a really productive conversation. The odd time, and again, these are like corner case outliers, but the corner case outlier is often the hardest one to deal with because it's so infrequent, you can't really get good at it. That's why best practices and toolkits are so important. If it happens a second time, we're going to set the boundaries again, but we're going to add a consequence. And we're going to say, listen, like, again, my name is Paul. I'm here to help. I'm going to do everything I can to make this right. I really need you to stop using this language. Be specific. Because if you aren't able to stop, I'm going to have to end our call, and you can call us back when you're in the right frame of mind to have this conversation. Then, if it happens the third time, you get to go to them and say, listen, Paul, I appreciate how frustrating this is. We're not able to have a productive conversation right now. I'm going to hang up the phone now, and I'm going to encourage you to call back in about half an hour when you've had some time to recalibrate, to come into this with a proper mindset, and then we hang up the phone. Now, the real power in this is when you include that in your notes for the next agent.
Oh shit.
So you include in your notes, you're not this guy, but I talked to Paul, and I terminated the call because he was using this type of language. I want you to know you're my partner, you're my peer. We're figuring this out together. And then when that guy does call back in, or lady calls back in, and Sally answers the phone. Sally can say, "Oh, hey, I hear you were talking to my colleague Paul a half an hour ago. I hope we're going to have a really great conversation this time. I can't wait to help you get this resolved." And now we've got this collaborative partnership across the contact center, and we're also retraining customers on what is and isn't acceptable behavior. And again, this is corner case stuff. This is like in a contact center that gets like 500,000 calls a month. This is, 50 calls. Even if it was 500 calls, that's not even 1%, right? Like this is a very small percentage of the calls, but they had a huge impact on the employees. So again, I'm super proud of that work.
I wonder if, on this side, they have like a score, like, how like Uber and like these companies keep a score on
the 5-star rating for customers. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think they have that set up yet, but they could totally, that's something that you could do. Right. But again, yeah, it can be subjective and, yeah, there's pros and cons to that approach for sure.
Of course. In fact, I think that would be kind of interesting. And then also, I really like the fact that there's these notes that are already there about how this person, anyway, so that was all very super interesting. Now, I'm actually super curious, how did you actually learn all this? And then how did you come up with all this language and framing and scripts? And did you bring somebody on, or is this your own education? Like, how did this, tell us more?
Yeah. So, no, I'm not the genius around positioning and wording. I can help with it. I can usually come up with a good starting point. But we actually spend a lot of time building these types of best practices and approaches with our clients. Because listen, like the agents, managers, they're the ones talking to customers all day, every day. I don't. So I know what the steps might be. Like I know the first step is to, ask a thoughtful question, listen to the response, acknowledge what they said, summarize what you heard, ask a clarifying question, summarize what they then said, and ask permission to, solve the problem. Like high level, there are some steps. The words that go with it, yeah, there are some, SwitchGear has been doing this for 20 plus years. So yeah, we have a bunch of things that work really well already. We understand what good sounds like and what bad sounds like. We know more what not to do. And we have a perspective on what we could be doing. But in everything, we work with agents and with sales reps, because part of our positioning when we go to roll this out with the teams is, I'll actually say to people, like, this isn't Paul working in his basement in a silo figuring out what you guys should say. Like, this was built by agents for agents, or built by reps for reps. And so there's people who already are figuring out ways to handle these really abusive customers. We work really hard to figure out who those people are. We listen to their conversations. We codify and break down the steps that they subconsciously just do naturally. And then we are able to teach it to others. So I'd say the thing that we do really well is deconstructing the steps, naming the steps, and figuring out a starting point of what the step might sound like, and then validating that with our partners. One final thought on this is we don't build scripts. We never say to somebody, you have to say it this way. We say, like, this is one way to say it, but there's 10 different ways you could say this. And we actually encourage our frontline employees that we work with to figure out ways to ask questions and say things that match their personal style, because that's how it feels authentic, right? Everybody has talked to somebody who's reading off of a script from like a telemarketing standpoint or something, and it sucks. So one of the very first questions we get asked is, do I have to say it this way? And our answer is always no. That's not what we're here to do. We're not trying to create a bunch of robots.
I think I read some LinkedIn meme where some agency got hired to write the scripts of all the frontline workers, the customer success. And it was like abomination.
Yeah.
They have no connection. Like there's some copywriter sitting somewhere else in some other part of the universe. They're so detached from like what's actually happening on the ground. Anyway, so I really like that approach. One is firstly, like almost like the non-script script. And by script, we actually mean like, here's a framework, here's the guardrails, here's like the tools that you will need to handle this kind of difficult conversation. And when you were describing it, I was just sort of living that whole thing, like experiencing it from that person's perspective. So I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, well, and when we build it from the standpoint of, if you are a brand new hire, how would we teach you, right? Like oftentimes we're not teaching really effective reps how to do these things. We're helping them understand the steps that they do subconsciously, consciously, so they know what they're doing and why they're doing it and the impact that it has. But we often build these from the standpoint of, you're going to hire a new sales rep, you're going to hire a new agent. How are you going to teach them to do discovery? How are you going to teach them to ask for the sale? How are you going to teach them to handle an abusive moment? And yeah, we build it from that standpoint. And the other thing too, we acknowledge is in these customer experience maps, which is just a collection of these best practices, they're designed to handle 80% of the conversations. 20% of the conversations, like you're going to have a conversation today you've never had before.
Right.
We'll get you started.
Yeah.
Pieces of this might apply, pieces of it won't. Like best practices and call flows and sales process, they're not permission to turn your brain off. You have to use your intuition. You have to use your gut. You have to like ebb and flow as the conversation goes. It's not always going to go like the PowerPoint says it should.
I think one thing that you didn't talk about, which you had earlier talked about when you first told me the story, is that this is not even something that the client had asked you to do.
No.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then I'll segue into sort of another thing. I just thought that how you even thought about this was actually a lot more interesting personally to me.
So yeah, when it came to that abusive moments work, that wasn't part of our initial scope. Our initial scope was just to build out their customer experience map, build out or install a coaching program, gain adoption of that. But one of the beautiful things about the work that we do is we're able to identify and isolate the other big impactful challenges that other people maybe just don't see or are aware of. And when we identified this problem, we went back to the customer and we said, listen, like, here's what's happening. Here's the impact it's having on your business. And we want to tackle this.
You had touched on this earlier, but just for the audience listening, because we were documenting it, how did you actually find out that this was happening? I
think I mentioned it earlier. Like it was basically the executive had said, like we as part of our work, we measure and document and report on all the metrics we're trying to impact. And for this organization, there was like 7 of them. And we had 2 or 3 that we were really closely tied to, but we looked at everything holistically, and we noticed, and the executive noticed, that attrition and absenteeism was going in the wrong direction. And so it was through those, we call them rapid roundtables. We met with the managers, highlighted what we were seeing, and just asked them for their input. That's how it was. One of the managers who put their hand up and said, I think it could be this. Let's talk about it. And others said they were seeing the same thing, and that's how we uncovered it. You build relationships with these people. I've been working with these frontline workers for 5 years, and I wanted to do my part to protect them. So we just went back to the client and said, listen, we're going to build this out for you. We're not going to charge you. This isn't in our scope of work. We don't do this regularly, but in this situation, because of the impact it's having on people's already fragile mental health, we're going to do this work and produce it for you, which they really appreciated.
This is such a good testament to one is firstly, your personal brand, reputation, long-term thinking, all that stuff that we were talking about earlier. The other part is getting curious and like, let me find out what's happening here, even though this is not part of the scope. Most people I've come across, they're like, this is not part of the scope. Don't talk about this.
Yeah.
right? Their mentality is like, why are you taking so much extra work on your plate?
Well, and there's a time and a place for that. But, the other thing, just very quickly, we were able to build this best practice in 3 weeks.
Damn.
Yeah. So we identified the problem, isolated the root cause, developed the best practice, tested and validated it, and implemented it in 3 weeks. So we can do things, what we did in 3 weeks, it would take organizations 6 months to do. And so that's why we were able to absorb this in our scope of work. Because if it was going to be a 3-month project, then yeah, we'd go back and say, it's going to cost you X, and do you want to do this? But because of the speed with which we can do things, it was just it was a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of my favorite case studies and stories that you've shared with me. And now we have it on the podcast. So, and documented for other people to enjoy.
Totally.
So, without naming names, there's a little bit of an overlap here. And I thought it would be kind of funny and cheeky to get your sort of perspective is, based on sort of your personal experiences, I know that you're working on certain things where this kind of problem that you solved might not even exist in the future. Or do you want to set the context of like what you're seeing firsthand of like where a lot of the frontline work, like this kind of work, is going to get transferred over? Do you want to talk, like set the stage a little bit?
So earlier in the conversation, you made this reference around people having questions or feeling like they have answers. And we all know that person who's got the syndrome of the smartest guy in the room. The truth is, the smartest person in the room is this. I can ask Siri anything. I can use AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, all these different tools to answer questions that I have. And we're beginning to see the early stages of AI being implemented in organizations. You think about like sales automation, Salesforce CRM tools, notifying people when somebody should be sent an email. And I'm even going to craft the email for you, and you just have to click send. Maybe you don't even have to click send, right? So it's those the mundane, the tactical things that AI can help us with in automation.
By the way, Paul told me about this tool to use with my Zoom account, which just does all my note taking. So you no longer need to sit there and take notes manually.
Fathom. Yeah. It's a great tool.
That's like one example of like these mundane tasks that you no longer have to do.
Yeah, and they're great tools because, like with Fathom specifically, you can focus on the conversation and be really connected to the person you're talking to, not scribbling notes and trying to keep up, right? So yeah, like there's a place for all these things. Where AI is moving to is very exciting, but when I talk to my parents about it, there's also a lot of concern. So I saw an application being developed where, I'll tell you about a couple of different examples. So there's an application being developed with AI language models and AI voice technologies that are essentially going to be able to have 5-minute, 10-minute conversations with people. It's not at the stage yet where it can have a sales conversation, but it can definitely have a early in the process engagement conversation, let's call it, right? They can ask you some questions. It can collect some information. It can invite you to a meeting. It can book you into a meeting, and you don't really even know you're talking to AI. If you're really paying attention to it, there's a few verbal cues you'll see where you're like, oh, that inflection in the voice was a little off. But for the most part, it's pretty solid. And so I showed this technology to my parents, and my dad immediately was like, oh, like if this gets in the wrong hands of people, like this has some real bad implications. I'm like, yeah, every technology does, right? Like look at TikTok, look at Facebook, look at, you get bad actors on there. You only have to look at the US political situation to see how bad actors are going to leverage technology to their advantage. And so yeah, like we have to be responsible with how we deploy it. So yeah, there's frontline sales functions that for sure I think are at risk I think about like BDR functions. I think about SDR functions, sales development rep, business development reps, whose job it is to book meetings for account executives. I think those jobs are probably the ones that are at risk in the next 6 to 12 months. Not to create any fear out there, but like, yeah, those are issues. And the only way that humans can really compete against it is we have to be so good. And the quality of our conversations, the quality of our questions, the quality of our connection has to be so good that companies just can't justify the move to AI. Like the drop off, I'll give you an example. SDRs that book demos. If your show up rates are 80%, so 4 out of every 5 customers who book a demo show up to the demo. That's both a measure of quantity and quality. If you book 5 demos and 1 person shows up, that's a 20% show up rate. You've just set the bar so low for the AI, they literally have to trip over it, and it's going to be better than the SDR. So the way that teams can hedge, or at least maybe push out the AI coming in and taking over, is to just get so good at what you do. Become a master. And there's coaching that goes with it. There's the experience maps that go with it, like all these different factors. The other technology that is out there that is now, Microsoft is developing it. It's called VASA 1, VASA-1. And this is crazy. Your LinkedIn page, do you have your headshot out there?
Yeah.
Every single person has their headshot out there, virtually. 98% of people have a headshot. True. On LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, on something. So that's out there. VASA 1 can take a photo, a single photo of a person, and it's 30 or 60 second sound clip, and can create an AI clone of that person. So this podcast, I like, you and I have totally shot ourselves in the foot. We're doing this podcast. You're going to have like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of content where they now have my voice. My headshot is on LinkedIn. You can plug this into VASA 1. Microsoft can. It's not an open platform yet. Plug it into Microsoft VASA 1, and it will create a clone of Paul Hicks. And now you can create scripts. Like you talk about deep fakes, like in the past, like this is the next level of a deep fake. And this again, like it has some amazing applications in the business world, right? Like think about being able to customize a video message to a prospect using Paul Hicks's likeness and his voice that is specific to the conversation we had, the pain points you had. I can have an AI prompt that I plug this into. It creates this script, plug the script into VASA 1. It creates the video. The video gets automatically sent out by HubSpot CRM or Salesforce, whatever it is. And now every single customer I talk to, I could be talking to 100 customers a day. Every one of them is getting a personalized 60-second video from me. Awesome application. On the flip side, the things that this could be done from a negative standpoint, nefarious activities, like, of course, it's a real risk. So the interesting thing about these technologies is they're becoming so good at mimicking human behavior. Eye movement, mouth movement, hand movement, voice inflections. The US government has already passed a law that says you cannot use this technology for outbound cold calling. So inbound leads that are warm, lead magnet goes out, you give me your phone number, I can call you using this technology. I can't use it for mass outbound calling. So that's just on the sales side. On the customer service side, we're seeing some really good applications of AI with like the note-taking thing we talked about earlier. So AI will listen to the call, be able to measure customer sentiment, the emotion, where did the call go off the rails? What did the rep say? What could they have said differently? Can we provide coaching notes to their manager, and then also do summary notes right in your CRM tools that summarize the conversation really succinctly and concisely and consistently, because that's a real challenge with customer service teams, just the lack of consistent notes. So there's lots of good applications for this. I don't think, in my opinion, AI is not coming to take over the majority of these jobs. I think it's going to take over the transactional, simple roles, which it already has, like chatbots in customer service. We're seeing that already. AI assistants in websites for simple FAQs. That makes sense. Like, we shouldn't be paying people, to do that kind of redundant, tedious work. We should be paying people to do valuable, have valuable conversations with our customers.
There's sort of these two parallel thoughts that come to my mind. So one is, and I think you rightly said, obviously, it's going to start with like the D players, the C players, they're going to get eliminated from the professional food chain, so to speak. And you got to up your game, and so on one side, we're like almost like in a little bit of a paradox, because on one side, you got to be at the top of your game to stay relevant. And on the other side, there's things like a couple of things. One, AI doesn't have feelings, and it can scale. And what it's learning in this one conversation, it can apply to the whole organization very quickly in real time.
Just to build on that for a second. So AI doesn't take sick days. AI doesn't take vacation. AI is relatively easy to scale. A lot easier than human capital. There's that side of it. And then what was the other point you were making?
So the other point that I want to go into slightly is, and this is something that I was talking to a friend of mine with. Yeah. This gets a little bit esoteric, but it'll make sense. Just stick with me, folks. Is that if we think about things like, and this is something that I was thinking about actually writing and making content around, is if we think about, do we remember people's phone numbers now? No.
Totally.
And so the one is the mental atrophy that humans have. The second is physical atrophy. So even like example, like, astronauts, when they go up in space, they're not using their legs. So their legs become very weak. So they have to do a lot of training on the spaceship, or when they come back to regain, like being able to walk again,
muscle
for example.
Mass, all, yeah, totally.
So inherently humans atrophy whatever we're not using. So the generation that we are, for example, we've lived, let's say, majority of our life outside of AI and all this tech. And so we have a lot of foundational, like that's what you would use in like physical training lingo. You have a lot of foundational strength and, mobility and muscle built up over years that can help you go into your old age. Right. And you want to keep working at it. You want to keep lifting weights. You want to eat healthy. Similarly, when we were growing up, we didn't have technology and tools. So for most of our childhood, we sat there bored. Yeah. We weren't distracted. So our fundamentals are pretty strong. So even though today things have completely changed, our fundamentals are still strong. But the kids that are coming today, their starting point is distraction, and with, instead of asking the question, they're finding like the answers right away from AI. Like there's no deliberation, getting bored, sitting there with your thoughts. Or
even worse, they're not even asking the question.
Right. They're just sitting there with their thoughts. They have never gone through that phase of like memorizing everybody's phone number, that whole mental exercise and building that muscle. Yeah. So in one way, we're saying become a better human. And in another way, we're building everything around them, which discourages them from doing that. I know I'm taking a wild leap here, but
you're not. Because, for the first time in history, the human attention span is less than a goldfish. Right? It's down to 7 seconds. And you look at YouTube shorts, you look at just the way content is promoted to us, right? Like even you watch like a YouTube video, like that 5-second skip button. Like I'm at second number 2 and I'm like, come on, let's go. It's 5 seconds. Like, come on, seriously. Right. But that's where we're at. And you're absolutely right. Like one of the biggest fears that I have for my kids, and my kids, they were teenagers when we went through the pandemic, right? The kids who today are 6 and 7 years old, like they're even further behind because they were like infants, like from the ages of 1 to 2, the amount of development that happens in the brain is like, and again, my wife talks about this all the time. Like it's amazing how much, amazing is the wrong word. It's sad. It's sad how kids are coming into the schools today, like going into grade 1. And she's like, you can see like a stark difference between a grade 1 today and a grade 1 5 years ago.
I mean, with social media and all these different content platforms, there's definitely a wider spectrum of options available. So, and then also it's, I think you made a really good point is that, and you could totally infer from that is it could be the same individual, but depending on the context you're in, you could be like, okay, I'm going to lean into this podcast for 3 hours. And that's why the Joe Rogan podcast is the best podcast in the world by all numbers combined. And it's non-edited, no flashing editing, nothing. And it's just like one conversation from A to B, 3 hours, and that's it. So there is an audience for something like that. But then there's also like the TikToks and the YouTube shorts, like you likely said. So it could be the same individual, but depending on the context and what mood you're in, you might either lean in or be like, can I just listen to this at 2x the speed? So that's definitely there, but that's for us with our like completely different fundamentals and foundations of like how we grew up and how we saw technology come into our life versus being born into that technology. And now, like I've seen so many like videos online where like people are like literally filling out their quizzes and answers like questionnaires in classrooms, literally using ChatGPT, and that's it. So it's not about the answers that's important. It's about the ability to like sit there and be like, okay, how do I find the answer? Or how do I become the person that has the ability to go figure it out? So I guess we're somewhere, I feel like this is a more philosophical, I guess, part of the conversation, I guess. Where we're headed is, I don't know what's going to happen because all this skill is getting atrophied away. It's like learning to write. If we're just going to have ChatGPT write everything for you, when are you going to learn how to like write and communicate something? Yeah. Or if ChatGPT or AI is going to do all your videos, then what about you getting on stage and fighting that fear of like getting out of your way and that all that inertia, so all that stuff, right? That's kind of what I'm thinking about these days is like, this AI is great for people like us because we've seen this is like an additive to us. It's like, I think the difference between like when you think about characters like Iron Man, for example, he knows how to use the tech to enhance himself, right? Versus what's that other character? Like RoboCop, that's just fully AI. There's a big difference between RoboCop and Iron Man. Yeah.
And it's that human empathy side that's oftentimes missing. And so I think what would be helpful maybe as like a next step in this conversation is, so what are the things people could be doing?
Yes.
And how do we help them not overcome the AI intrusion, but at least prepare themselves for it effectively?
Be like Iron Man. How to use this technology in a way that enhances your life, and you can do so much more, right? So
earlier you mentioned writing. And when it comes to AI, one of the critical skills is AI prompt writing. How do you get really good at writing prompts? And with the company that I'm working with on the AI front, the individual who's responsible for their AI prompting, he is unbelievable at writing prompts. And when we think about prompts, when I think about a prompt, I think about like a paragraph, right? I'm writing a paragraph, then it's like, it's really, really simple. And I thought it was a decent prompt. I see what he's writing. He's writing a 2.5 page prompt.
Holy shit.
And because the output he's getting as a result is incredible in what they're able to do. So I think, yeah, your idea of like writing prompts is one skill that people could be getting really good at. I think the other skills around like your current job, how do you get really good at your current job? And this would apply for both frontline employees and managers and leaders. The first is get really good at documenting, really good at deconstructing steps. I'm putting myself out of a job here, but it's okay. If you can get really good at documenting processes and steps and the sequence in which things need to happen, that's a really powerful thing, because people will say, like, describe your sales process. Well, we do X, Y, Z. Here's the sequence we do it in, but nobody ever writes it down. Nobody ever documents it. And so if you can document things, once you have something documented, now you actually have a blueprint that you can check against, right? You can say, okay, did this step happen? Yes. Awesome. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well was this step done? Anything less than a 9, where did it break down? And what can we do to improve it? If people just started asking, like, sales reps can do this today. You don't need a manager to help you with this. Customer service agents, they can do it today. Like, you don't need somebody to do this for you. And AI can help you. If you plugged into AI, give me a well thought out 8-step sales process for this type of a company, this type of a role, selling to this type of clients. It'll give you a foundation. Now you have to take that and refine it and personalize it and make it your own, and really figure out where the gaps are. But if you can just document for yourself what should be happening and in what sequence, that's a fundamental skill that would really help people just get better at their day-to-day job.
This is the sort of like, what are the 3 or 4 things I can start doing right now, irrespective of where I am in the organization?
Totally.
And, to enhance my capabilities, to double down on my strengths, which has been the theme of this conversation. Yeah. And how do I use AI for that?
So the other thing that I would encourage people to do is, just because of how remote work has become, like the sales team that I'm working with right now, like we have people based in Montreal, Ottawa, Hamilton, like all over the place. And they do all of their customer conversations over Zoom. And we record all of their conversations. And we use it for coaching purposes and helping them get better. It helps if you have a coach. But you don't have to have a coach to help yourself get better. So recording, so these two things go in tandem. The next time you do a sales conversation over Zoom, any conversation, discovery, presenting a proposal, negotiating a contract, a cold call. If you're able to do it over Zoom, and you can record it using Fathom or any other AI software, go back and watch it and review it and break down. So the recording itself can help you, and Fathom could probably help you deconstruct it into the steps that I discussed earlier, like mapping out your system and your process. And then identify things you did really well, things you did okay, and things you felt you could have done better. And now you've begun to build your own coaching model where you can say, that question that I asked, that really got them to open up and start talking. I'm going to ask that again. Or I'm going to ask that in every one of these conversations, or a version of it. When I asked this question, they actually clammed up and they gave me a one-word answer and stopped talking. What was it about that question? What was it about the timing where I asked that question? Was it my tone that I used to ask the question? Is there a different question? So now you're able to actually just get a little bit better every day. So you're leveraging the AI to help you get better in your job. You're leveraging the AI to help you map out your job and in terms of your systems and your processes, and you can identify where the gaps are to get better. AI is not the enemy. AI can absolutely help people here.
I also really like that you connected the dots between, you don't wait for a mentor or a coach, right? Like that's what you're kind of speaking to. Like you have the tools right now, get started. And as you were sort of describing sort of some of that, two thoughts came to mind. One is people might be sitting there be like, well, I can't use any external tools on my system because it's all blocked, blah, blah, blah. So that's one set of people.
Okay.
Right. And we'll come back to you guys in a second. The other thought that I got was like, you could literally take that transcript of the conversation, feed it to ChatGPT and say, okay, you are a sales leader. Yep. Coach me through what worked and what didn't work. And you can have a conversation and get at least some level of insights of like how to improve.
So this company I'm working with, they've built that. They've built this. So you upload.
I'm a genius.
You are. You upload the Fathom video into a software. The software will analyze it against what it thinks good is based on the inputs, and it'll come out and it'll say, here's what you need to improve. The challenge is, and it creates like a 2-minute AI avatar video talking to the rep about here's what you can be improving. The challenge with it is it'll spit out everything. So my suggestion is inside of your prompt, you can do this one of two ways. Only give it the piece of this transcript you want to diagnose. So earlier we talked about like the discovery phase. Like so you're doing a discovery call. It's 20 minutes. First 5 minutes are just platitudes and building relationship. The next 10 minutes are the actual discovery, and the last 5 minutes are summary and next step. Only give it the section of the conversation you want it to diagnose, and give it a very specific thing to look at. So it's only instead of it coming back and saying, well, here are the 7 things you got to improve, it's coming back with the one thing you have to improve, and you can then focus on that. People aren't really good at fixing 5, 6, 7 things at a time.
That's the coach in you speaking right now.
It's one of the principles of our coaching model. Like one is the loveliest number because people can only focus on improving one thing at a time.
In fact, I would say, not to like challenge what you were saying or anything, but like, how can I build rapport faster and get out of the pleasantries like in 30 seconds and go straight into like, okay, so this is what you're struggling with, right? Like
that's a challenge that a lot of salespeople have.
They're just like conversation to nowhere.
What you're describing there is call control. And so like call control is like, how do I open the conversation? How do I do the pleasantries? But to your point, I listened to a call 2 weeks ago. The first 17 minutes of a 45-minute conversation was pleasantries because the person didn't know how to get out of that phase. Yeah. Right. So it's like,
I want to build rapport. You should like me so I can, but yeah. Anyways, that's a whole different topic for another day.
Did you want to know how to do it?
Okay, yeah. So for anybody who gets on a sales call and just ends up like, hey, how are you? And the same boring stuff, Paul's going to teach us how to fix that problem.
Here's one way to do it. There's a bunch. Yeah. So the way that we encourage people to enter these conversations is like it's a simple, hi, thank you so much for taking the time. I want to be really respectful of our time together. So here's what I'm going to suggest. We take 2 minutes and just introduce ourselves to each other. And then if you're okay, I'd love to just jump in and ask a couple of questions to learn more about you and your business. Like it sounds like really simple and dumb, but like if you just set the expectation up front, just like most objections can be avoided, so can these types of problems. And it works even better when you have like 10 minutes with somebody.
Oh, I really like this because, right up front, you just set the agenda. A couple of things I personally like to do is just send the agenda in the invite itself.
Totally.
And that's one that you could do. And then, so you don't have to even do that on the call. Second thing over is, when somebody asks like, so how's everything going? What's up?
That's a bad question.
If somebody asks me, I'm saying like when I get on a call, somebody like the client or whatever, they're like, they ask me, I'm like, just boring, same old everything. So let's talk. And I just go straight into like, so that thing we were working on.
Or the converse is they just go. Yeah. And they're telling you about their weekend plans and all this stuff that happened. And then you've just lost them. Right. So just by like setting some time boundaries and we encourage people to do this in their coaching.
Yeah.
If I'm coaching somebody who rambles on.
Yeah.
I can just say to them, hey, like, I'd love to hear your perspective on why that was so effective.
Yeah.
Can you just give me like the 60-second quick hit? Like, what do you think why did that work so well?
I really like the fact that you're being very instructional and giving guardrails, because otherwise, you know, you don't know in what mindset this person is in, where they're coming from, what they're thinking, right? So I really like that sort of like, let's talk about this stuff, to avoid having a 30-minute conversation to nowhere.
And we've all had them. Hand up.
Same. You don't need somebody to like you to be working with you, to respect you, you know, because you also want to come off as an equal, not like low status.
That's a big one, right? And just setting up these conversations with some forethought, respecting their time, respecting your time, getting clear on the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Like I like the way you describe it. It elevates your status, makes you sound more professional, which instantly builds credibility.
Exactly. That's why I hate those lines of like, you know, I really appreciate that you took out time in your busy schedule to talk to me. It's like, that's low status behavior. Yep. So that's just one quick example of that. Anyways, so, you know, we've almost hitting the 3-hour mark. And I thought it'd be a good time to start landing this thing. Sure. But before we do that, actually, I would still want to tease out this topic that we've been on. As we go higher up the ranks in an organization, what is the sales leader and so on, so forth, can do to empower, or how can they personally use some of these tools?
Before jumping into tools, I would say the number one thing people need to do differently in their day-to-day job is get closer to the frontline reality. Spend an hour every day, ideally at the beginning of your day, before all the meetings pile up, observing your people doing their work. And do it from a position of like zero judgment. You're not here to fix anything. You're just here to listen, learn, and understand what their day-to-day reality looks like. And listen to them talk to customers. Watch them build their sales forecast. Watch them handle challenging customer questions and customer service teams. Like just spend time with your reps and your agents learning about what it is that they do. And you'll be amazed at how quickly you uncover Sally, who I thought was a mediocre performer, is actually awesome in this one particular area and could be teaching the rest of the team how to do this. And Sam, who is an incredible closer, while he could be teaching everybody how to close deals, he's actually not great at opening opportunities. But Jim is really good at the opening side. So he's going to teach Sam how to open, and Sam's going to teach Jim how to close. And now you're getting a really clear understanding of where people fall from a skill set standpoint in the competency model. So that's what I would suggest that people, and if you want to just, I mentioned the competency model, Google it, look it up. It talks about, you know, people who are like quadrant 1, they're unconsciously incompetent. I don't know what I don't know. Quadrant 2, you're consciously incompetent. I know what I don't know. Quadrant 3 is you're consciously competent. I know what I'm doing, but I have to think about it. And quadrant 4, which is what we call mastery, that's where I'm unconsciously competent. I just do it naturally. I don't have to think about it. I've mastered the skill. And if you can deconstruct your people's roles into different skills, again, sales is relatively easy. You've got engage, discover, solve, and commit. You're going to find some people are quadrant 2 on discovery and quadrant 4 on commit and quadrant 3 in solutioning and quadrant 1 in engage because they don't have to do it. It's not part of their job. Now you know what I need to coach people on and what I need to reinforce. So, but you can't do that unless you're actually observing people. So, but like number one, table stakes, like the thing, you could start doing this right now. Tomorrow morning, 8:30 a.m., book an hour, grab one of your reps and say, hey, listen, I just want to understand the reality of your job. What are you doing between 8:30 and 9:30? Doesn't matter what it is. It might be fascinating to hear they don't actually have a plan. But you don't know that if you don't ask. So just, hey, listen, I'm at 8:30. I'm preparing my day. I'm sending out some cold outreach email. At 9 o'clock, I've got a initial conversation with Jim at ABC Co. Awesome. Can I just sit with you and listen and learn? I just want to like learn from your expertise. Would that be okay? If they say no, you have a trust problem. That's a different episode. Most times they will say yes, and you're good to go.
You're going back to the fundamentals. Do the basics right first before. It's like that quote from Elon Musk is like, the common mistake engineers make is optimize for something that shouldn't even exist. So you're like, you scale something first, you optimize it, you scale it, and then you realize you don't even need it. So I like that you're starting with like, okay, go first, figure out what the strengths are of your team. And then actually, that's actually really good for culture, team bonding, building,
everything.
All those things. It covers a wide spectrum of activities there. Okay, so we've covered the frontline workers, the sales leaders. And is there anything else that you would want to add before we start closing off for today?
I would say on the sales manager front, from an AI standpoint, they can do the exact same thing that frontline employees would do to improve their customer conversations. You can also use it to improve your employee conversations. So if you're going to have a coaching conversation with someone, regardless of what coaching means or sounds like in your world, whether you have an installed program or it's just something you're winging it on the fly, which many leaders have to do because companies aren't investing in it as they should. You can do the same thing. Remote teams. I'm going to have a coaching conversation with Paul. It's going to be over Zoom. I'm going to record it in Fathom, and I'm going to pump that into Gemini, ChatGPT, and I might find a coaching framework that I like and use that inside of my prompt to say, using this framework, analyze this call, identify, things I did well, and one or two things I might improve. Like there's another way you could do it. And now the coach is getting coached by the AI. That's another way you could look at using that.
I like the use of framework and look at the conversation through that lens. And that's actually very, like, again, I like the idea of like how you bring guardrails around and getting specific.
Yeah, if you just leave it like wide open to say, what did I do well here? AI doesn't know, right? But if you give it a framework and for these types of applications, you might have to go into a paid version of the AI. They're like $25-$30 a month. Like, it's not prohibitive, but it'll learn faster, and you can give it like websites, PDF documents, and it'll do it better for you.
In fact, one of the ways I've used AI is I took this course that I was doing. I was like, I don't have so much time to go through this whole course. I just got don't kill me and shoot me and whatever. But I literally got somebody on Fiverr to go download the entire course for me for my personal use. I put it into a PDF, fed it to AI, and then only the things that I needed to learn, I just said, okay, this is my question. This is the context. How would I respond in this situation? Boom, boom. And that's it. It's just for my personal use. Yeah. And so like, imagine 500 pages condensed down to like just 5 things I needed to know. And then I can always go back and ask it questions, and it'll reference that specific PDF. Yeah. That's just one way how I've used it personally. So this has actually been really helpful, and in terms of thinking about how to use AI, and then but then not forgetting the human input is super critical. And this is actually, I thought, would be an interesting way to sort of wrap up the conversation. And this is something that we've sprinkled across the conversation and had a good laugh about it. What did the CSO say to the CMO?
We're going back 2.5 hours to where this whole thing started. Yeah. I love it. I think before you say anything, I mentioned earlier this idea of like documenting. One of the first things that I did in this one client that I'm working with is I mapped out the customer journey. And I mapped out so like on the marketing side, generating leads, MQLs, auto-booked demos, and I'll do that all in one color. And then when the color changes to sales, that indicates a handoff. And how do we ensure that that handoff is done effectively? And then the sales team runs in another color. And then at the end of the sales system, you then go into like customer success and the onboarding of the customer. And now you have a handoff there. And why I like doing this is because it creates very clear and specific accountabilities, and the vagueness of, well, who owns this or who owns what, and where does this team hand off or where does this job begin? That all goes away. The next layer down of that is, okay, I'll use sales. Inside of sales, let's say it's red. I have light red for an SDR function. I have dark red for an AE function. And I have some other shade of red for like maybe a sales admin function or something off on the side. So now it's not just cross-functionally, where did jobs start, where did jobs end, but it's inside of each functional team. Where does a job start? Where does a job end? Because I think there's like organizations tend to not have a lot of good clarity around that. Once you are able to map that out, and oh, by the way, you do this in conjunction with your head of marketing and your head of customer success. Once you all get aligned, now you're able to talk about the things that we need to improve, where things are going well. And you're able to have just really good, clear conversations on, marketing is accountable for MQLs. But sales is accountable for turning MQLs into SQLs. Are there things that marketing could be doing differently to make it easier for sales? And are there things that sales needs to do differently to maximize on the marketing investment?
Just for the audience, this thing, MQL, SQ, like
marketing qualified lead versus a sales qualified lead. Yeah.
Three-letter acronyms.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah,
good call out. Yeah. So with this one organization I'm working with, I've taken on this like fractional VP of sales role, and I'm working very closely with the marketing head and with the customer success head. And again, I think it helps that we have this mutual purpose around the Net 12 program, where we're all gunning for the same outcome. When marketing is focusing on profitability and sales is focusing on revenue and customer success is focusing on, lifetime value, like that right there creates the perfect storm of, I'm not talking to you, or you don't understand my world, or we're not aligned, because you're not aligned. So I think just figuring out what is the North Star, what's that one metric that everyone can rally behind and get aligned to, absolutely helps.
Love it. Paul, this has been a fantastic conversation. We've talked about a lot of different things, from human behavior to, doubling down from things like doubling down on your strengths, to getting curious and learning a little bit about your personal experiences working with a large telecom operator and this new AI company that you're working with. And then we also covered the way you can leverage AI to enhance yourself, kind of like Iron Man. Be Tony Stark. Yeah. And And then what I like to do towards the end of the conversation is two things. So one is I'm going to ask you a question. This is a book I have. I'm going to put it on the screen there. It's called 3001 Questions All About Me.
All right.
And you basically
be gentle.
Have I not? Okay, so basically in this, the guest picks a number between 1 and 3001. And then once we do this, which takes about a couple of seconds, any final words based on anything that you would like to leave the audience with, that's one. You can start thinking about that. And then finally, where can people connect with you? So we'll start with...
All right. 1,974.
Since you are here, I'll let you read it yourself.
Oh, geez. Is it self-incriminating? Is that what's happening?
Not really. You're okay. It's a good question, though.
What's more annoying to me, the hiccups or a mosquito bite? This is very appropriate because I've just come back from the cottage and my legs are covered in mosquito bites. Hands down, mosquito bites. They stick around for much longer. Hiccups only last for like a minute or two. Mosquito bites, because I itch them, they torture me for weeks.
Well, look, folks, what else is Paul telling you? If you do your job right, you probably have a cottage to go to over the weekend.
Family cottage, not mine. Family cottage.
Reading between the lines. Anyways, so what are any final words that you would like to leave the audience with, and where can they reach out to you?
Everybody needs to be kind to themselves. It's you are where you are. You can't change where you are today. You can change where you are tomorrow. Don't beat yourself up. Don't compare yourself to everything else that's out there. Just get a little bit better every day. Right? That like 1%. 1% in a month, 1% in a week, 1% in a day. Like, just try to get a little bit better every day, and you'll be amazed at how quickly, if you have that mindset, you'll improve. And I hope this was helpful for folks. I hope there's like, even if just one thing people take away and are like, I'm going to give that a try. Awesome. Like that's a huge emotional deposit for me in people going on and doing that. So I love that. As far as where people can find me, the best place and where I do 99.999% of my work is on LinkedIn. So check me out there, Paul Hicks. Follow. If you're not, hit me up for a connection. And if you have a question or a business challenge, you just want a new way of thinking about it, I'll do my best to help you with that.
And I will link all of those things in the show notes so you don't have to scramble and figure it out. Thank you, Paul. This was a lot of fun.
Loved it. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. You did a fabulous job, and I think we covered a lot, but there's so much more we can be talking about. So maybe we do another one in the future.
That's part of my guest experience, customer success.
Reducing churn. Repeat podcasts.
It's like a consultant in me before the podcast ends. If the guest is like, I can't wait to do the next one. Okay, I did something right.
You did a lot. It was awesome. And I love this setup. It's not as chaotic as people think.
Thank you. Great. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
This was fun.
That was awesome.
Oh my God.
That was fun.